glass doors slid open with a soft hiss, and the hum of the airport poured in. Rolling suitcases, scattered laughter. The tired voices of travelers waiting to get home. Eleanor Hayes moved through the crowd with her usual grace, her tailored coat brushing against her heels, her head held high. She was a woman used to boardrooms, headlines, and silence when she entered a room. But tonight, she wasn't here for business. She was simply passing through, another traveler in the blur of departure boards and fluorescent light. And then she froze. Across the terminal, a man was kneeling, tying a shoelace on a little girl's sneaker. Another girl, identical in every way, from her loose braid to her restless fidgeting, leaned against his shoulder. Twin daughters, 6 years old, maybe 7, and the man was Daniel, her ex-husband. For a moment the world dimmed. The years of distance, the sharp edges of their divorce, the lives they'd built apart. All of it collapsed into this one startling sight. He looked older, stronger, more tired, but his laugh as he lifted one daughter into his arms carried the same warmth she remembered. Daniel turned, as if pulled by the weight of her gaze. Their eyes locked. Neither spoke. Neither moved. Just silence in the middle of the chaos, charged with something unspoken. Something was about to change, because sometimes the past doesn't stay buried. Sometimes it walks straight into your path at an airport. What would you do if the life you left behind suddenly stood in front of you again? Eleanor stood rooted to the floor, her leather bag slipping from her shoulder as the crowd swept past her. For 6 years, she had rehearsed what she would do if she ever saw Daniel again. Maybe a polite nod. Maybe nothing at all. She had never imagined 2 little girls clinging to him, their daughters, flesh and blood, her absence etched into their lives as clearly as her name was etched onto skyscrapers and business magazines. Daniel's expression hardened when he recognized her. It wasn't anger exactly, more like a guarded wall, a quick tightening of his jaw. His arms tightened around the twin balanced on his hip, a protective reflex Eleanor couldn't miss. She tried to breathe, tried to move. The airport no longer sounded like rushing footsteps and rolling wheels. It sounded like judgment. It sounded like the choices she had made when she walked away from this man. And she realized with a crushing weight from the possibility of those girls. Before she could speak, a sharp, commanding voice cut through the moment. "Daniel, the car's waiting." A woman strode toward them, polished and confident, the kind of presence that filled space without apology. Eleanor recognized her instantly. Victoria Monroe, a ruthless real estate mogul she had faced across boardroom tables more than once. If Daniel was stone, Victoria was fire. Confident, dismissive, and powerful in the way that made people either obey or scatter. Victoria's eyes flicked to Eleanor, her smile sharp and knowing. Well, if it isn't Eleanor Hayes. She didn't extend a hand, only raised an eyebrow. Airports do bring out the ghosts, don't they? Eleanor felt her throat tighten, but she refused to flinch. She drew herself up, calm and composed, the way she had done at every press conference, every boardroom ambush. "Victoria." The twins looked back and forth between the 2 women, curiosity shining in their wide eyes. Eleanor saw herself in them, not their features but their composure, the way they observed quietly, waiting for the adults to reveal their secrets. Daniel's voice broke the standoff. "Victoria, take the girls, I'll handle this." It was a command, not a request, and though Victoria narrowed her eyes, she obeyed, ushering the girls toward the exit. The twins clung to his arm for one last second before letting go, leaving Daniel and Eleanor alone. Silence again, heavy, thick, dangerous. Eleanor found her voice, though it felt like glass in her throat. "They're yours." Daniel nodded once. "Mine." His tone was clipped, final. "They don't know you." The words hit harder than she expected. She had known there would be consequences when she chose her career over their marriage. She had told herself Daniel would be fine, that he didn't want children as much as she didn't. But standing here, looking at him, a father steady and devoted, she realized how wrong she had been. "They're beautiful," she whispered. For the first time his eyes softened. Just a flicker, but it was there. He glanced toward the doors where the twins had gone, then back at her. They are. The crowd pressed on around them, impatient travelers weaving between the stillness of their encounter. Eleanor felt exposed, as though the fluorescent lights were stripping her armor away. Daniel took a slow breath, his gaze never leaving hers. Why now? After all these years? She wanted to tell him she hadn't known, that no one had told her, that her world had been nothing but meetings and acquisitions and late nights staring out the window of her high-rise penthouse, wondering why silence followed her everywhere. But before she could answer, Victoria's voice rang out again from the doors. Daniel, we're leaving. Don't waste time. The dismissal burned. Eleanor's instinct was to fight, to match Victoria's confidence with her own. But Daniel's eyes held her, and in them she saw something unexpected. Not blame, not triumph, but weariness. You've done well for yourself, she said quietly. He studied her, his expression unreadable. And you? She let the question hang, because the truth was complicated. She had wealth, yes, power, influence, recognition. But at this moment, staring at the man she once loved and the daughter she never knew, all of it felt like paper. For a long beat, neither spoke. Their silence was not empty. It was full of years unspoken, decisions unmade, paths untaken. Then something small broke the tension. A little hand slipped free from Victoria's grasp near the exit. One of the twins ran back, weaving through the crowd, and tugged at Daniel's coat. Daddy, are you coming? Eleanor's heart clenched at the word. Daddy? Daniel crouched, smoothing the girl's hair back with a tenderness that caught Eleanor off guard. His voice softened in a way she remembered all too well. I'll be right there. The girl's eyes flicked to Eleanor, curious, unafraid. For a second, Eleanor thought she might ask a question, but instead the child simply nodded and ran back to her sister. When Daniel rose again, his gaze lingered on Eleanor. The noise of the airport seemed to fade, replaced by something quieter. Their eyes locked, and in that silence, she felt the ground shift. There was no forgiveness yet, no resolution, but there was recognition of shared history, of pain, of choices that had carved them into who they were now. Daniel adjusted his coat, his voice low. This isn't the place. I know, Eleanor whispered, and for the first time in 6 years, she felt not like the billionaire who could bend markets to her will, but like the woman who once believed in love. Victoria was waiting, sharp as ever, but Eleanor hardly noticed. Her focus was on Daniel, on the quiet strength in his stance, the way his eyes lingered on hers just a fraction longer than necessary. A seed had been planted, something unspoken, fragile, but undeniable. And Eleanor knew this was only the beginning. You said. The sliding doors opened again, and a cold draft swept across the terminal. Eleanor stood tall, even as her chest tightened. She had built empires, negotiated billion-dollar deals, stood against men twice her size and twice her arrogance. But standing across from Daniel, with the shadow of Victoria looming and the quiet pull of those children, she realized her greatest strength was not her money or her reputation. It was her courage to face what she had run from. I didn't know, Eleanor said, her voice steady, carrying just enough for Daniel to hear over the crowd. I didn't know about them. If I had, her throat caught, but she pressed on. I would never have left. The words landed like a crack in glass. Daniel froze, his jaw tightening, his eyes flicking toward the exit where the twins were waiting. For a long moment, he said nothing. The silence between them drew attention. Even Victoria turned, her perfect smile faltering just slightly. You expect me to believe that? Daniel's voice was low, rough, the sound of a man who had carried too much for too long. 6 years, Eleanor. 6 years of birthdays, first steps, nightmares in the middle of the night. You weren't there. The sting of his words cut deep, but she didn't flinch. Instead, she stepped closer. Just enough that only he could see the tremor in her hands as she clenched them into stillness. You're right. I wasn't. And I can't change that. But don't mistake absence for indifference. I didn't choose this. I thought we couldn't. She paused, gathering herself. I thought we couldn't be parents. I thought that was what we agreed. Daniel's face shifted. conflicted. He looked at her the way a man looks at a storm, bracing for impact, unwilling to trust the break in the clouds. Behind him, Victoria's heels clicked sharply as she approached, voice slicing through the tension. "This conversation is over. Daniel, the girls need stability, not drama." She let her gaze sweep over Eleanor like a verdict. "And they certainly don't need her." Eleanor turned slowly, deliberately. Her voice didn't rise, didn't falter. She met Victoria's cutting tone with calm precision. "You don't get to decide what they need." The words hung in the air, sharp and clear. Travelers paused mid-step. Even Victoria blinked, thrown off for the first time. Daniel's eyes widened slightly and Eleanor felt something shift inside him. She had spent years speaking for shareholders, for executives, for empires. But here she was speaking for herself, and for two little girls who had no idea their mother was standing only a few steps away. "They deserve to know the truth," Eleanor said softly, her eyes locking with Daniel's. "And you deserve not to carry it all alone." For the first time, Daniel's shoulders dropped, just a fraction. The weight he carried, the armor he wore, she saw it crack. His silence wasn't rejection now, it was consideration. Victoria scoffed, masking her unease. "Truth doesn't change the past." "No," Eleanor agreed, turning back to Daniel. "But it can change what comes next." The moment stretched thin. Daniel's hand brushed against his side, a nervous reflex he'd always had when torn between choices. Eleanor's eyes followed the motion, and then gently she reached out. Her fingertips grazed his sleeve. Not a plea, not possession. Just contact, just presence. Daniel didn't pull away. His eyes dropped to her hand, then rose back to her face, searching, questioning. The crowd around them blurred, noise falling away until there was only the two of them, bound by something fragile but real. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't reconciliation. But it was recognition of what they had shared, of what still flickered beneath the rubble of years apart. "Daddy!" The voice broke the moment. One of the twins had wandered back again, clutching a stuffed rabbit to her chest, her gaze darting between them. Daniel crouched, steadying her with a hand on her shoulder. Eleanor lowered herself too, her movements careful, almost reverent. Up close, she saw the girl's eyes, bright, searching, innocent, a mirror of her father's. Eleanor's voice softened. "That's a very brave rabbit you have." The little girl blinked, surprised that this stranger had noticed. Then slowly she nodded. "Her name's Clover." Something inside Eleanor cracked wide open. She smiled, small and warm, the kind of smile she hadn't felt in years. And when she looked up, Daniel was watching her, really watching her, not with anger, not with judgment, but with something quieter, something closer to belief. The terminal seemed to exhale, the noise rushing back in, announcements, chatter, rolling wheels. But between them, a different kind of silence lingered, a silence filled with possibility. Eleanor rose first, steady and unshaken. "Daniel, let me try. Whatever that means, however you'll allow it. Just let me try." The girl tugged Daniel's hand. "Daddy, who is she?" Daniel hesitated, his eyes locked on Eleanor's. And in that pause, in the charged stillness, he gave her the smallest, almost imperceptible nod, a promise that the story wasn't finished. Eleanor's heart steadied. She had found her strength, not in control, not in power, but in truth. And now, for the first time in 6 years, she had hope. For a moment, the air around them felt still, as if the entire terminal had stopped to watch. Eleanor's words, "Let me try," echoed louder than the announcements blaring overhead. She hadn't raised her voice, hadn't fought or begged. She had simply spoken with the calm conviction of a woman who had nothing left to prove except her truth. Victoria's lips parted, ready with another sharp retort, but it didn't come. Instead, she hesitated. The polished confidence she wore like armor cracked just slightly as she looked from Eleanor to Daniel, then to the little girl clutching Clover. For the first time, there was no victory in her eyes. Only calculation, and maybe, just maybe, a flicker of respect. "You're serious," Victoria said, her tone quieter now, not mocking, testing. Eleanor held her gaze. I've never been more serious about anything. The silence stretched, heavy and full. Daniel's hand remained on his daughter's shoulder, but his eyes lingered on Eleanor. She could feel it, that subtle shift, like a tide pulling in. Not forgiveness yet, not acceptance, but recognition of the strength it took for her to stand here, exposed and ask for another chance. And then something unexpected happened. Victoria stepped back, not far, but enough. Her stance softened, her sharp smile fading into something almost neutral. She looked at Daniel and simply said, "It's your choice." The words surprised even Daniel. For years, Victoria had controlled the narrative, sharp-tongued and unrelenting, always telling him what was best for him, for the girls. Now in this moment, she relinquished control. Eleanor's calm resolve had shifted the balance. Daniel's daughter tugged again at his coat. "Daddy, can she come with us?" The question hung in the air like a fragile thread. Eleanor's breath caught, but she stayed perfectly still, not daring to sway the moment. Daniel looked down at his little girl, then back at Eleanor. His jaw flexed, his eyes searching hers. She met his gaze, steady and unflinching. For years, their connection had been buried under pride, fear, and silence. Now it was laid bare, fragile but alive. Finally, Daniel stood, lifting his daughter with ease. He didn't answer her directly, but his hand brushed Eleanor's as he adjusted his grip. It was the lightest touch, fleeting, yet it carried the weight of 6 years of distance breaking, just a little. Eleanor swallowed hard, her chest tight. She wanted to say something, anything, but the words stuck. Instead, she let her eyes speak. Gratitude, longing, resolve. Daniel seemed to understand. He gave her the faintest nod, almost imperceptible, but it was enough. The crowd around them surged again, the moment swallowed by the ordinary rush of airport life. Victoria gathered the girls, her sharp edges dulled for once. She glanced at Eleanor one last time, and though there was no warmth in her look, there was no disdain either. Respect had replaced arrogance. As the group moved toward the exit, Daniel lingered just a step behind. He turned back, his eyes finding Eleanor in the chaos. For a heartbeat, it was just the two of them again, suspended in silence. "Tomorrow," he said quietly, almost like a test. "We'll talk tomorrow." Her breath left her in a rush she hadn't realized she was holding. She gave a single nod, her lips parting in the smallest, softest smile. Not triumphant, not desperate, just real. Daniel's gaze softened, almost proud before he turned and followed his daughters. Eleanor stood where she was, her coat brushing against her legs, the hum of the airport rushing back in. But inside, everything had shifted. She was no longer the woman who had run from her past. She was the woman who had faced it, who had stood her ground with quiet strength and earned back something she thought was lost forever. Respect. As the automatic doors closed behind Daniel and the girls, Eleanor let herself breathe. A strange calm settled over her. Not relief, not victory. Something gentler, something like hope. And though the terminal was full of strangers, Eleanor felt less alone than she had in years. The next morning, Eleanor stood by the wide windows of a small cafe near the park, her hands wrapped around a coffee she hadn't touched. Outside, sunlight spilled across the playground. Children chased each other through the grass, their laughter rising into the morning air. She had chosen this spot carefully. Not a boardroom, not her penthouse, but a place that felt ordinary, human. She almost didn't believe he would come. But then, just as the church bells downtown began to chime the hour, Daniel appeared at the edge of the street, the twins walking beside him. They were dressed in matching denim jackets, their braids bouncing as they moved, one clutching Clover, the stuffed rabbit. Eleanor's chest tightened. Yesterday had been a collision. Today felt like a test. Daniel caught her eyes through the window before stepping inside. He didn't smile, but he didn't look away either. The girls, curious, peered around him, their whispers rising like tiny bells. "Daddy," one said softly, "is she coming with us?" Daniel crouched to meet their eyes. Eleanor couldn't hear the words, but she saw the way his expression softened. The same look he used to give when comforting her during long nights years ago. Finally, he nodded. The girls lit up, tugging him toward the door. When they entered, Eleanor stood, steadying herself. She wasn't sure what role she was about to step into, only that she couldn't turn back. The twins eyed her with shy curiosity. Eleanor crouched low, careful not to crowd them. "Good morning," she said gently, her voice warm but restrained. "I'm Eleanor." The girl with the rabbit tilted her head. "Your daddy's friend?" Eleanor glanced at Daniel. He was watching her, arms folded, his face unreadable, but his eyes steady on hers. The tiniest flicker of encouragement passed between them. "Yes," Eleanor said, her voice soft but sure. "I'm Daddy's friend." The girls seemed satisfied with that answer. One climbed into a chair, the other set Clover on the table, as if introducing her too. Eleanor smiled, the knot in her chest loosening just a little. As the girls chattered, Eleanor and Daniel sat across from each other. For the first time in years, the silence between them didn't feel like a wall. It felt like space, room to build something new. Daniel spoke first, his voice quiet but firm. "They've had enough chaos. If you're serious about this, it has to be steady. No half measures." Eleanor nodded. "I know. I don't want to disrupt their world. I want to fit into it. However you'll allow." He studied her, searching for weakness, for doubt. But Eleanor held his gaze, her shoulders square, her breath steady. This wasn't the woman who once walked away. This was a woman willing to stay. The twins interrupted, demanding pancakes, pulling Daniel's attention. He laughed, not the booming laugh she remembered, but a quieter one, worn from years of responsibility. Still, it carried warmth. Eleanor watched him, and something inside her shifted again. Admiration, respect, maybe more. When the food arrived, the girls insisted Eleanor try a bite of their pancakes. She did, smiling at their insistence, and for a brief moment, they were a family at breakfast. No contracts, no past wounds, just forks clinking against plates, maple syrup smudging small fingers, and laughter that surprised Eleanor with its ease. As the meal ended, Daniel gathered the girls' jackets. Eleanor rose too, smoothing her coat. For a moment, the chaos of plates and chatter fell away. It was just the two of them again, standing close, the weight of unspoken words pressing between them. Daniel's eyes softened as he looked at her. Not with suspicion this time, but with something steadier. Something almost like pride. "You did well," he said quietly, almost as if it surprised him. Eleanor's breath caught. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she let her eyes hold his, speaking without words. A thank you, a promise. The girls tugged their father toward the door, impatient for the park. Daniel turned slightly, pausing just long enough to meet Eleanor's gaze one last time. His hand brushed against hers as he adjusted Clover under his arm. Subtle, fleeting, but deliberate. It wasn't a grand gesture. It wasn't a declaration, but it was real. Outside, the sunlight stretched across the park. The girls ran ahead, their laughter rising, their jackets bright against the green. Daniel and Eleanor walked side by side, not touching, but close enough that their steps fell into rhythm. For the first time in 6 years, they weren't divided by silence or pride. They were moving forward together, not as they had been, but as something new, something steadier. And as they crossed into the park, their shadows fell side by side, long and unbroken in the morning light. Life has a way of circling back to the places we thought were closed forever. Eleanor walked into that airport expecting just another stop in her busy life. Instead, she faced the very part of herself she had left behind. Love, family, and the question of who she really wanted to be. Maybe you've had a moment like that. A moment when the past suddenly stood in front of you, asking whether you were ready to face it. What did you do? Did you run? Or did you find the strength to stay? There's a quiet kind of power in being truly seen. Not for your successes, not for the mask you wear, but for the person you are beneath it all. And sometimes the greatest gift is not a second chance at success, but a second chance at love, respect, or belonging. So who stands beside you in your hardest moments? Who do you trust to see you and stay? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Share your story in the comments. Tell us if you've ever faced a turning point like this. And if this story touched you, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Because sometimes the most powerful journeys are not about where we go, but about who walks beside us when we get there.